This sikha, in addition to being on Parshas Vayakel, is also a siyum in Hilchos Beis HaBchira. And in the end of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, the Rambam is describing the halachis of Shmiras HaMikdash, guarding the Beis HaMikdash. And then towards the end, the Rambam says in one halacha, he says, halacha Yud Aleph, that every single morning, before dawn, Kohanim would be walking around with torches of fire to check that everything was in order. And then in the very last halacha, the Rambam concludes in a separate halacha for itself that this is what they did every single night besides Friday night on Shabbos. Rather than they would use candles, lamps that were burning there already from before Shabbos. And the question is, of why is it that they couldn't be carrying around these candles on Shabbos? Carrying around the candles, as opposed to lighting of fires, of course, not allowed. That's the Isur of Shabbos. But carrying around the candles is called the Isur Shavus, one of the kinds of rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos, which wouldn't apply in the Beis HaMikdash. The Kesef Mishnah answers that in this case it's different because there's another option. You could be using the lamps that were there from before Shabbos. So why use something that's technically Asur Midrabanan and Isur Shvus? But the Rebbe says this is not understood because the Rambam himself clearly says this rule of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, that the prohibitions of Shvus do not apply in the Beis HaMikdash, even in situations where it could have been done also in a different way. Some examples are, on Yom Kippur, it says if the Kohen Gadol is an elderly person or a sick person, and he has to go to the mikveh, which is cold, so they could heat up rods of iron before Shabbos, and then on Shabbos, on Yom Kippur rather, they'll put it into the mikveh. And this is an Isur Shvus, and nevertheless, it's allowed to be done, even though technically there are other ways of getting the water warm, which wouldn't involve any Isur whatsoever. In a similar way, the Rambam says, if the Kohen is starting to fall asleep, the young Kohen starts snapping their fingers. Again, this is an Isur Shvus, which could have been avoided by doing it in some other way, keeping them awake. The Rebbe says, simply you could say, there's a big difference between making it as a regular way of doing it every single Shabbos, as opposed to these cases by the Kohen, which are totally an unusual case, and maybe by those unusual cases the Chachamim allowed it, but to make this type of order every single Shabbos to carry those candles, that's why the Chachamim said you shouldn't do it, since there's another way of doing it. However, the Rebbe says this is not enough, because we also have another case, which is an established halacha, also on a fairly regular basis, that if Erev Shabbos, Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, nevertheless, the skinning of the carbon would be done in a particular way, as it was done every single year, over skinning the animal over particular maklois, particular sticks, poles, which was also an Isur Shvus, which should not be done on Shabbos. And yet it was done, even though, again, technically it could have been done in another way. And here, this is being done every time Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. So we're back to the question, why are we considered about this Shavus of carrying around those candles on Shabbos? The Rebbe says some other general things we need to understand. Why are these two halachas related to checking the Azara and the Shabbos halacha? B'chlal, generally in the Hilchos Beis HaBchira, it belongs in the halachas that describe the avodah, the Beis HaMikdash, Hilchos Tmidah, Musafin, etc. And also, why is the Rambam putting these halachas in two separate halachas? First of how it was done every day, and then how it was done on Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, the Rambam tells us already in the beginning of the Perek, when he describes the idea of guarding the Beis HaMikdash, that we guard the Beis HaMikdash not because we are afraid of enemies, but rather this is a form of kavod, a way of honor. And the Rambam says, the Rebbe says, from this we understand, that these halachas in this Perek also are connected, all of these halachas, with this idea of the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. So when we speak about the end of the Perek, the idea that the Kohanim are going to be checking that everything is in order, it's not so much as a preparation for the avodah of the next day, which then it should really belong in the halachas of the avodah of the Beis HaMikdash, but rather they're doing it as part of the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. How did we understand this? The Rebbe says, it's explained in other sichos, that what is the honor of the Beis HaMikdash? The honor is that there's constantly people thinking about the Beis HaMikdash. There's people being awake all night as guards, thinking about the Beis HaMikdash. In a similar way over here, the checking, the fact that it's being checked every day is adding in the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. This is also why the Kohanim say, when they see each other after checking the Beis HaMikdash, they ask, is everything shalom, everything peace? And they say, Hakol shalom, everything is peace. Why not another expression that everything is in order? Because it's an expression of honor, of respect for the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, back now to why they weren't carrying the fire on Shabbos itself if it's only a Shavuos. But in order to understand this, the Rebbe is first going to make a comparison to something that we know about Chanukah. We know that Hashem made a Chanukah with a nace of Hashem made a miracle on Chanukah with the oil, that it burned for 8 days a night. Even though technically they could have used Tamei oil, That's the halacha, or at least according to one opinion, that if there's nothing else available, they were allowed to use tamei oil. But Hashem made a miracle to be able to get pure oil, because they couldn't have pure oil, so Hashem made a miracle that a little bit of pure oil they had burned for 8 days and nights. Says the Rebbe, the explanation given is for this, because since the idea over here is that Hashem wanted to show how much He loves the Yidden, so therefore, even though technically the avodah could have been kosher, but nevertheless, Hashem wants to show His love that they don't need to use and light the menorah with shemen that needs to have this sort of leniency. And therefore, Hashem makes this miracle. Says the Rebbe the same thing over here. If the bedika of checking the Beis HaMikdash would just been one of the other things that are done in the Beis HaMikdash, so fine, there's a halacha that there's no idea of shavus in the Beis HaMikdash, this prohibition doesn't apply. So you could check even with the fire. But since it's being done for the honor of the Beis HaMikdash, and we're trying to honor the Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't fit, it's not right. The lechatchila should be done in a way that we're finding these leniencies in it, something that's technically a shavus, because again, we're trying to show the honor of the Beis HaMikdash. This would be inappropriate of it. It's not the best way of showing the honor by relying on these leniencies. We want to do it in the best way possible. It says the Rebbe, now we understand why this all belongs in Hilchos Beis HaBchira and why this Shabbos idea is as a halacha for itself. Because this is the way we're actually even more emphasizing the cover of the Beis HaMikdash. That we're trying to say, the rest of the Perek was speaking about, we're trying to honor the Beis HaMikdash by guarding it. Now we're saying in the last two halachas, not only did we check it every day to honor it, but furthermore, so the checking itself is for the honor, but also we're going to be doing it in the very best way without any atadim, without any leniencies of that could involve desecrating Shabbos, even if it's midrabanan, and even if there's a heter, even if there's a leniency. And that's why this is the very end of the Perek, and the end of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, emphasizing the cover of the Beis HaMikdash in the most beautiful way. The Rebbe now offers another explanation in this halacha of why they wouldn't want to rely on this leniency of the Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. And again, it's going to be related to understanding the story of Hanukkah. The Rebbe says, in order to understand this, first another general idea. Seemingly there's a contradiction regarding doing work on the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. On the one hand, to bring the karbonos, tzibur, on Shabbos, the carbon tamid, the carbon musaf, is not only allowed, but it's a mitzvah. On the other hand, we know building the Beis HaMikdash does not push off Shabbos. You can't build the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. How do these two things go together? So the explanation is, once we have the Beis HaMikdash built already, we then say anything being done in the Beis HaMikdash is considered absolutely holy. It's not considered mundane, it's not considered weekday, and therefore it's not a desecration on Shabbos to do it, so we can bring the carbon. But if we're trying to establish the Kedusha in the Beis HaMikdash, we're building the Beis HaMikdash from the beginning now. So that cannot be done with the act of Chilul Shabbos. You can't bring about the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash and make the Beis HaMikdash with Chilul Shabbos. This is similar to one of the explanations that's given on that question regarding Hanukkah, why they couldn't use the tamei oil, why Hashem had to make a miracle. Because in that case, they were rededicating the Beis HaMikdash from the start, in a certain sense, as a result of what was happening previously in the Beis HaMikdash through the Greeks and all of that. And that's why it would be inappropriate. They were starting a new menorah now, etc. And therefore it would be inappropriate to use the tamei oil. Says the Rebbe, the same thing we're going to apply over here. That Chachamim are not going to allow us to do a shvus in the Beis HaMikdash if we're trying to establish or to add, in some way, enhance the covenant of the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash. How do we understand this? Says the Rebbe, let's first understand why these halachos of Shmiras HaMikdash and Kavod HaMikdash come into Hilchos Beis HaBchira. The mitzvah of building Beis HaMikdash is actually not the building per se, going ahead and building, constructing the Beis HaMikdash. The mitzvah of Beis HaBchira is to have a Beis HaMikdash. Part of that is that we guard the Beis HaMikdash. This is what's achieving, this is what's making it up into a Beis HaMikdash, a house of honor for Hashem. If that's the case, if Shmira itself is what's contributing to making it that house of honor, it's making it into a Beis HaMikdash in a certain sense. So when the Kohanim are also checking every single day the Azara, it's not only again a hachana, a preparation for the Avodah, this is part of a continuation of this making the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why we don't say this rule again of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, because we just said, when we're building the Beis HaMikdash, or when we're not building, constructing necessarily physically, but when we're causing the Beis HaMikdash to be there in the way it's supposed to be, since this Shmira is part of making up the covenant of the Beis HaMikdash, making the Beis HaMikdash, that's why it's not going to push off Shabbos, and that's why we're not going to allow the carrying of these candles on Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, this idea that we just mentioned, that the mitzvah is really not about building the Beis HaMikdash, but rather to have the Beis HaMikdash is connected to what the Rambam says in the beginning of Hilchos Beis HaBchira. He uses the expression Las is Bayis LaHashem, but it's explained that he doesn't use the term livnos. It's not about building, it's about having the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore also in the end of the Beis HaMikdash, he's speaking about this idea that part of the having the Beis HaMikdash is the Shmira of the Beis HaMikdash, which is part of that mitzvah, and that's why once again, there's the Bediko at the end, that we check it for the honor, which is again contributing to making that Beis HaMikdash what it is, the honor of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's why the Shavus of that does not push off Shabbos. The Rebbe concludes with the Pnimi Yisrael Yanim. Finishing Hilchos Beis HaBchira also is the hint to the Shleimus, to perfection of the Beis HaMikdash, meaning the third Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash that Hashem himself is going to make, which is going to be, in the times of Mashiach, the time that's compared to Shabbos, Yom Shekulei Shabbos. So one may think that at that time, when we're going to have the perfect Beis HaMikdash and the greatest things happening, so what is all of our avodah in the time of Galus worth? It's seemingly insignificant, Chas v'Shalom. The Rambam tells us on the contrary. On Shabbos, where do they have the fire from? It's from Erev Shabbos. In other words, all the light that we're going to have in the times of Mashiach is from the light of our mitzvahs that we do right now. And that, of course, gives us our encouragement that we should be working on our own personal Beis HaMikdash, doing our own avodah, and that will bring about the building of the third Beis HaMikdash, the Geula HaMitzvah Shleima b'Meheira v'Yameinu Mamash.